Good evening, everybody, to the latest session organised by our admirable Craig of the Anglo-Turkish Society. And we're very pleased to welcome this evening Ekaterina Aygün, who already for such a young scholar has a remarkable track record in that she's took her MA from Istanbul University and then her PhD from Ludwig Maximilian University in München, and already has worked on a European Research Council project. And her book on Émigré artists from the Russian Empire has been published in Russian. So remarkable. So we're very, very delighted to welcome you this evening, and we look forward to your presentation. So thank you very much, and over to you.
Thank you so much. I will open my presentation now. Do you hear me, by the way?
Yes, we hear you very well. Thank you.
Yes, great. Thank you. So here is the presentation. And ladies and gentlemen, good evening. First of all, I would like to thank Craig Answer for inviting me and for giving me this opportunity to share some information related to regarding my research on Russophone Émigré artists in Constantinople, Istanbul. Well, it is actually a pleasure to be a speaker here today, and during my today's presentation, I will first explain how I began working on this topic and how it has developed. Then I will say a few words about my newly published book, and finally I will address some myths, or maybe it's more accurate to say widely accepted beliefs surrounding the topic of Russophone Émigré artists in Constantinople during the 1920s. Well, and excuse me, please, for my voice. I've got the flu, but I will try to do my best. So let's go back to 2019. That year, I have completed my master's studies at Istanbul Bilgi University, and I was invited to join the Metromod project at Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich. And I have to say that it was actually a very good time, at least for me and maybe for some of you, since it was right before the COVID-19 pandemic and all the horrible consequences of this period. The Metromod project, the full name of the project is Relocating Modernism, Global Metropolises, Modern Art and Exile, was an interdisciplinary project which was financed by the European Research Council, and this project combined methods from art history, exile studies and urban studies to examine European artists who sought refuge in cities like Istanbul, New York, Buenos Aires, and more during the first half of the 20th century due to wars, political oppression, and many other reasons. One of the main goals of the project was to challenge the dominant narrative of modernism centered around Western European cities like Paris, Berlin, or Vienna. Instead, the project sought to highlight the role of global interconnections driven by migratory movements in shaping modern art across various metropolises. Well, this was achieved by examining various city districts and sites of interaction and collaborative projects, exhibition venues, and more. I strongly recommend you to visit the website of the project, metromod.net. It contains valuable information on the project, our publications, including digital projects such as virtual city walks with focus on exile and art. Well, as part of this project, my initial task was to investigate the Union of Russian Artists in Constantinople, a group of émigré artists who were active in the city from 1921 to 1923. However, my research quickly expanded as I discovered and realized that Istanbul actually can be considered an important artistic hub for these immigrants, émigré artists during the period between 1919 and 1927. Well, since many, I would say the majority of Russophone émigré artists eventually relocated from Istanbul to other cities and other countries, including France, the United States, and Brazil. Existing materials on the topic are scattered throughout across various private and public archives worldwide. So at the start of my research, I planned to contact the representatives of noble Russian families and collectors in France, hoping to have an access to their archives and collections. However, soon I realized that this wouldn't be fruitful, primarily because they were either unwilling to assist or requested significant financial compensation for this. So I turned to periodicals, now that is to say newspapers and almanacs, which were created by Russophone immigrants in Constantinople during the 1920s. And my initial task, my initial goal was to at least identify those émigré artists who worked and lived in Constantinople at the time. I mean their names and the names of their supporters, clients, and patrons. Well, I worked with these periodicals at the Slavonic Library in Prague, and I have to say that it was a unique experience primarily because these newspapers are not digitized. So they were real with this old smell and pencil markings on them and so on. So almost like touching history. And I'm very thankful to the library's director and his team for their support during my work on the study. And in addition to the Russian language periodicals, I also examined periodicals in other languages from the 1920s Istanbul, while working at various institutions in France and Turkey. Well, as a result, I have compiled a long list of Russophone émigré artists who lived and worked in Istanbul during at the time. And not only artists, also a long list of their supporters and clients. And after I worked to trace each artist's archives, artworks, and sometimes descendants, more than 60 names in total. And one of my most significant discoveries was the archive of Foster Waterman Stearns, an American diplomat and a key patron of the Union of Russian Artists in Constantinople. This archive is located at the College of the Holy Cross in Massachusetts, and it contains a wealth of various previously unknown materials, including artworks and albums created by Russophone émigré artists in Constantinople in the 1920s, as well as written sources and many other materials. And here again, I'm incredibly grateful to the representatives of the archive for their absolutely enormous assistance during my work on this research. It was very kind of them. Well, beyond institutional archives, I was also lucky to find several private archives and establish connection with some of the descendants of Émigré artists. For instance, with Kira King and her family from the United States. Um, to be honest, I feel myself very lucky that our paths crossed. Um, they are absolutely wonderful, lovely people, and thanks to their generosity, hopefully in the near future, the Istanbul part of the Émigré artist Boris Luban's memoirs will be published by the Orient Institute in Istanbul in the English language. And they are the descendants of Boris Luban. Well, yet another fortunate coincidence is that my research on Émigré sculptor and artist Roman Belinsky aligned with an exhibition at the Sakıp Sabancı Museum on Roman Belinsky's close friend and colleague, Turkish artist Melek Celal. In this particular case, I'm very thankful to Roman Belinsky's grandson, Luigi Capello, and Roman Belinsky's daughter, Diana Belinsky, and the entire Belinsky family for absolutely everything, including moral support. During my work on the study. I'm also grateful to Eduardo Mendes Cavalcanti from Brazil and Maria Artumov Testa from France. And I mention these names primarily because I'm deeply thankful for their trust and support, but at the same time, I mention them in order to show and to illustrate that reconstructing the broader picture of the lives and artistic activities of Rusophone Émigré artists in Constantinople had to be done like puzzle, piece by piece, individual by individual, family by family. So you can imagine it was not easy. Well, despite all the challenges, and there were many of them, I have to say, I have completed my doctoral dissertation, and I defended it almost 1 year ago. And after defending my dissertation, I decided to write a book in the Russian language. This idea to write something in my native language was on my mind for quite a long time, primarily because all my articles on the subject are exclusively in English and Turkish. And since I live in Turkey for many years, I had an opportunity to see with my own eyes how over the past decade Istanbul has become home to refugees from Syria and Ukraine, immigrants from Iran, relocations from Russia, among others. And I kept reflecting on Istanbul as a home away from home for displaced individuals. So for this very reason, I dedicated my book in the Russian language to Russophone Émigré artists in Istanbul in the 1920s and 1930s. By exploring, by examining their experiences through the concept of belonging. That is to say, by exploring how different groups from the former Russian Empire, be they Orthodox Christians, Jews, or Polish Catholics, developed this sense of belonging, of attachment to the city. Well, here is the book, and the book is richly illustrated. For me personally, this book became as an exhibition that never took place. Primarily because there were serious plans on on a large-scale exhibition on Russophone émigré artists in Istanbul, in Constantinople, and this exhibition was supposed to take place in Istanbul. However, due to the ongoing war, the plans for the exhibition were abandoned. Well, apart from that, the book also contains specially designed maps, and as you can see, its cover features a striking photograph by an émigré photographer, Nikolai Artamonov. It was taken sometime during the 1930s because people wear Western-style hats instead of fezzes, and it also features the Galata Bridge, which connects the historical peninsula and the Pirabeolu district, reflecting the book's focus on both parts of the city. Here I have to say that I'm very thankful to the Garage Publishing House for publishing this book in such a beautiful way. I have to admit that the Garage Publishing House is one of my favorite publishing houses worldwide, primarily because it constantly provides us with highly relevant and fascinating books in the fields of art, art history, and architecture. Well, and now we can turn to the myths or widely accepted beliefs, maybe. Firstly, I would like to say that the myths I will be addressing were mainly created, mainly developed by the scholars who worked and work in the field of the so-called Russia abroad and Russian immigration. They often have a very good knowledge of European languages, and they are familiar with the European cities. But the same, I would say, cannot be said about Istanbul and the Ottoman and Turkish languages, which is a problem. And secondly, I would like to say that the myths I will be discussing today are related exclusively to Russophone émigré artists in Constantinople at the time, and not to Russophone immigrants in general. I focused on this topic primarily because it has been largely overlooked, and even though a century has passed since émigré artists' time in the city, only a few of them have been studied thoroughly. And well, why is that? In the Soviet Union, they were considered enemies of the state. Let's put it this way without going into all the details. There was no interest in émigré artists in the Soviet Union, and after the Soviet Union has collapsed in 1991, Russia began to have interest in this topic. However, scholars faced a scarcity of sources due to frequent relocations of Russophone émigré artists from one place to another, from one country to another. Well, as for Turkey, Turkey actually had some interest in this topic, especially in those artists who eventually became Turkish citizens. For instance, Jules Kanzler, Vladimir Zander, İraida Barri, Naci Kalmıkoğlu, Ibrahim Safi. However, this doesn't necessarily mean that these émigré artists are properly remembered in Turkey today. For instance, in some new editions on a famous Turkish figure in the fields of cinema and theater, Muhsin Ertuğrul, there is no mention of his closest friend and collaborator, émigré Russian set designer Nikolai Perov. And Émigré Crimean photographer Jules Kanzler similarly is absent from some new editions on images of Atatürk and early Republican photographers. And unfortunately, Émigré photographers and artists often remain somewhere in between, receiving little attention from both their home countries and their host countries. And well-known artists are, of course, somewhat luckier in this regard, but the same cannot be said about others. Well, overall, mainly due to the lack of extensive studies and comprehensive studies on the topic, various myths and widely accepted beliefs were developed since the 1990s. Some of them stem from the few sources which were available to scholars during the early stages of their interest in the topic. And these are primarily two almanacs, Farewell and Russians on the Bosphorus. One was published in 1923 and another one was published between 1927 and 1928, as well as Jacques de Leon's numerous writings. I do not intend to underestimate these sources in any way. They are incredibly valuable, but they are not perfect, unfortunately. For instance, almanacs were created in haste. They were created by Russophone immigrants in Constantinople, and this led to some structural issues and inconsistencies. And Jacques de Leon's writings are pretty chaotic, and at the same time, they lack references to sources. So as a result, some scholars have mistakenly identified the chairman of the Union of Russian Artists in Constantinople as Vasily Ivanov instead of Vladimir Ivanov, and yet some other scholars have mistakenly attributed some of the artists to the Union of Russian Artists in Constantinople, while in fact they were never actually part of it. And in general, I would say that this combined information from these articles, from these almanacs and Jacques de Leon's writings roamed from one academic article to another for years, and often without any attempt to verify this information or to a little bit elaborate on it. Well, yet another issue is that since the 1990s, several editions on various artistic hubs of the Émigré Russian diaspora have appeared. And unfortunately, the majority of them, in the majority of them, Istanbul received little attention and was portrayed just as a transit point for Russophone artists. Paris, by contrast, was portrayed in much greater detail and received a lot of attention. So, in my opinion, this imbalance has contributed to the false impression that Istanbul was unimportant and played just a minor role as an artistic hub for Russophone immigrant artists in Constantinople in the 1920s. Well, unfortunately, we still don't know even an approximate number of Russophone immigrant artists who lived and worked in Constantinople at the time. The Union of Russian Artists alone had over 60 members, but not all the artists joined this society. Many of them preferred to work independently. Additionally, discussions about these artists often overlook their diversity, and it is important to understand that they were not only Russian and Ukrainian, but also Jewish and Karaite and Armenian and Azerbaijani and more. Sometimes we we don't have information about ethnic background because of some gaps in documentation. Yet, in some other cases, this ethnic background actually doesn't explain everything, because at the end of the day, Russophone émigré artists were products of an empire shaped by diverse influences. Well, not all the artists were young, they were of different age, and not all of them were male artists. There were also female artists among them, even though significantly fewer in number. Yet another misconception is that all of them were white Russians, that is to say, individuals who belonged to the white, who supported the White Army. This is partly true, of course. There were many who were affiliated with the white movement. However, there were also many of different political views, with some of the artists who were simply concerned with survival rather than politics. Well, the most difficult time for Russophone émigré artists in Constantinople, I would say, was between 1919 and 1921, when thousands of refugees from the former Russian Empire arrived in Constantinople, all struggling for food, housing, and work in a city which was already facing economic hardship. Yet another challenging period for them was between 1926 and 1927, when it was unclear whether the representatives of the newly formed Turkish Republic would allow them to stay and work in Istanbul. And here I have to say that official statements from Turkish authorities didn't always align with the real bureaucratic process of obtaining various documents for immigrants, for refugees. Now, however, the period between 1922 and 1926 was not as bad as it is often portrayed. At least my research reveals that Russophone émigré artists, the majority of them, by 1922 had managed to sustain themselves financially, exclusively through their artistic activities and artistic professions. Well, of course, while in Istanbul they lived in a modest way, but I suppose this was also the case for Russophone émigré artists in other cities like Berlin or Paris, especially for those who were not very well known abroad.
Why? Yes.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that this period from 1922 to 1926 was actually far from the desperate picture, which is often portrayed by some scholars. And those scholars often rely on some dramatic quotes from émigré journalists. For instance, there is this famous one, an artist in Constantinople is like someone buried alive. And interestingly, these and similar statements are often interpreted by some scholars the way that Istanbul didn't have absolutely any artistic life before the arrival of Russophone émigré artists in the city, and even after their arrival, its cultural life was still not of high level like in Berlin or Paris, for instance. And to be honest, I can't agree with these statements. Primarily because the artistic life in Istanbul at the time did exist. So there was this group of artists, which is known to us today as the 1914 generation, and various exhibitions were organized at the Galatasaray High School and at the Ottoman School of Calligraphy. Local female artists studied and worked at the Academy of Fine Arts, and Local Greek, Armenian, and Levantine artists organized exhibitions at various popular stores on Grand Rue de Pera and in churches, not to mention foreign artists who worked and lived in the city at the time. The city, Istanbul, was by no means artistically dead by the arrival of Russophone émigré artists. Well, as for activities of Russophone émigré artists in the city at the time, again, according to some scholars, they are incomparable to similar activities of Russophone émigré artists in Berlin or Paris. And again, in my opinion, it is too open to debate. At least my research reveals that the exhibitions of the Union of Russian Artists in Constantinople alone were actually groundbreaking. These exhibitions featured artworks of all contemporary styles, and including outstanding avant-garde pieces, which some of the inhabitants of Istanbul saw for the first time in their lives. And these exhibitions also featured diligently created sculptures and unique pieces of decorative art. And given the severe scarcity, believe me, it was a severe scarcity of materials and spaces where Russophone émigré artists could work, as well as financial resources which were available to them in Constantinople at the time. I think it is absolutely remarkable that they managed to create artworks of such high caliber. And this is evidenced by the surviving artworks. Many of them were sold during various auctions worldwide, as well as by the images, the photographs of their exhibitions in Constantinople, and newspaper articles and many other sources. I wish I could show you more images, but unfortunately it's difficult to obtain to get permission for most of them. Well, additionally, the work of Russophone émigré set designers who worked at the Tepebashi theater, Ptyshan theater, which was often compared in grandeur to productions in New York and Paris, deserves mention. And mention also deserves the work of Russophone émigré set designers who worked at the Russian clubs in the Barabiolo district. And this work appears to be as good as in similar establishments in Vienna or Berlin at the time. And while speaking of these achievements, I do not refer only to well-known set designers like Pavel Cherishev, for instance. In my opinion, figures such as Vladimir Babritsky, Leonid Tомилов, or Vepeche, presumably Viktor Prokopovich Czartoryski, and others also played a crucial role in this process. And unfortunately, despite all these achievements of Russophone émigré artists in Constantinople, according to some scholars, these artists were supported by some rich individuals in Istanbul exclusively out of charity. Well, in my opinion, such individuals were in the minority. And if you look, for instance, at Foster Waterman Stearns, an American diplomat and a key patron of the Union of Russian Artists in Constantinople, we will learn that he was actually an art connoisseur with an extensive experience in this field. So I believe that in supporting Russophone émigré artists in the city, he fully recognized that he was dealing with the representatives and graduates of the finest art schools of the former Russian Empire, including from St. Petersburg, Moscow, Kiev, Kharkiv, Odessa, Tbilisi, and beyond. Well, moreover, many of their supporters and clients stayed in touch, stayed in contact with them, even after Russophone Émigré artists relocated and left Istanbul for good. I think it is also worth noting that the majority, clearly, the majority of Russophone Émigré artists, after showcasing their talent in the city, eventually relocated to the United States with the help of the American embassy in Istanbul. Well, apart from that, I also want to focus on one specific widely accepted belief, which is related to isolation. This idea suggests that Russophone Émigré artists, while in Constantinople, lived and worked exclusively within their émigré circle, émigré world. And of course, there were some individuals who, due to their personality or language barriers, may have stayed within this circle. But I would say that this was the exception rather than the rule. First of all, Russophone Émigré artists didn't cut off all ties with those who remained in the Soviet Union. There is evidence that Émigré artist Dmitry Izmailovich maintained correspondence with the Soviet art historian Viktor Lazarev. And another example, which is actually a very interesting one, involves young Soviet art historians Nikolai Brunov and Mikhail Alpatov, who were sent to Istanbul in 1924 by the Soviet institution to examine Byzantine heritage of the city. And many photographs from this trip, as well as other sources, reveal that they were not actually alone in Istanbul during their walks in the city. Apparently, one of their assistants, let's put it this way, was an émigré restorer, Nikolai Kluge, who was an unofficial member of the Russian Archaeological Institute in Constantinople before the revolution, who actually had a unique opportunity to work as a restorer at both Hora Church and Hagia Sophia. Yet other assistants, let's put it this way, in my opinion, were émigré artists Dmitry Izmailovich and émigré photographer Vladimir Zander, primarily because their artworks and photographs follow closely the same paths taken by Brunov and Alpatov in 1924 in Istanbul. These, and there are also other examples, make it clear that contacts between Russophone émigré artists and those who remained in the Soviet Union, including those involved in arts, continued in various ways. Well, Russophone émigré artists also actively interacted with inhabitants and guests of Istanbul, and these relations took different forms, including friendships and romantic relations and professional relations and patronage. And I would say that it was almost impossible to stay in isolation at the time, primarily because the majority of Russophone émigré artists, while in Istanbul, lived and worked in the Pera-Beyoğlu district or in a close proximity to the Pera-Beyoğlu district. And this district at the time was absolutely full of various numerous joint artistic events which took place at different venues, such as the Union Française, the Tepebaşı Theater, the Italian clubs, and the Russian clubs, and more. And of course, Russophone émigré artists participated in these joint artistic events. Well, here I created a table which shows the names of those individuals in Istanbul who had more or less close connection to Russophone émigré artists. So maybe you can see that from the perspective of professional relations, they mainly interacted with Turkish artists in the city, but not only, also with Greek and Armenian and Levantine artists. From the perspective of clients and supporters, the majority of them were clearly Americans, but not only, also Italian speakers and French speakers. Some of them were Levantines and some of them were not. Turks were also among clients and supporters. And since I was invited by the Anglo-Turkish Society, Englishmen, yes, they were also among clients and supporters. Unfortunately, we don't have information, we don't have their names and surnames, but it is known that Englishmen were among them. And there is also another important point, it is not mentioned in this table. There was an émigré artist, female émigré artist, Lydia Nikanorova, who copied frescoes and mosaics at the Kora Church, Kariye Jami. And these frescoes and mosaics, these copies of them, were eventually purchased by the Museum of Victoria and Albert Museum in London. So unfortunately, I don't have information about the process, whose idea it was, but still, I think it is important to know that they still belong to the Victoria and Albert Museum. However, Russophone émigré artists didn't interact exclusively with the representatives of the Pera-Beyoğlu district. Their activities and lives actually extended well beyond the Pera-Beyoğlu district, and they actually spent a lot of time on the historical peninsula, where they sketched and painted and photographed Byzantine landmarks, as well as organized walking tours around Byzantine landmarks. And this, of course, was partly due to their desire to be a sort of successors of the Russian Archaeological Institute in Constantinople. But at the same time, this suggests that they were pretty much aware of various archaeological excavations in the city at the time, and were actively engaged in this, let's call it Byzantine obsession in the city, since there were many other groups in Istanbul at the time who were interested in the Byzantine heritage of Constantinople. Some of their works and photographs, which were created and taken on the historical peninsula, reveal their friendly terms with shopkeepers and cafe owners and local fishermen. And in my opinion, this interest in the city, its inhabitants, and its culture and history was encouraged not least by various lectures and walking tours, which were organized by their former compatriots, émigré art historians, and restorers in the city. Russophone émigré artists also had access to various Russian libraries in the city, which were pretty rich in terms of various editions in different languages on the history of Istanbul. I suppose now the myth, at least some myths, including the myth related to isolation, are dispelled. And to sum up, I also would like to say that that my research as a whole challenges the widely accepted belief that Istanbul was unimportant and played just a minor role as an artistic hub. I think it is important to understand that Russophone émigré artists were not simply involved in various artistic activities while in the city. They were actually deeply inspired by the city, and they created various artworks featuring Istanbul. And these artworks would travel with them and at a later time and would be showcased in various exhibitions in different parts of the world and would be met with great enthusiasm in these different parts of the world. And unlike various individuals who at some point of their lives had unfortunately to leave Istanbul and lost their inspiration, like for instance Ivi Strangali or Tito Lakia, Russophone émigré artists remained creatively active after relocating to other cities and other countries. But they constantly expressed a desire to return to Istanbul in order to paint, to work, and even briefly, even for a while. And I think that these are important details to highlight, and these are some of the details which are often overlooked by some scholars who still tend to see Istanbul as just a transit point for Russophone émigré artists. And because of this view on the matter, Istanbul part of Russophone émigré artists is often limited to just a few sentences in their biographies. So I think it is time to reevaluate the role of Istanbul as an artistic hub by considering newly published writings and newly uncovered sources, rather than relying on this old assumption that Paris was everything and Constantinople was nothing. Well, last but not least, I also would like to say that my research is just a starting point, and I hope that in the near future there will be more studies on the topic. Of particular interest for me would be studies like that of Ayşe Nurgüler, who examined the mutual influence between local artists, Ibrahim Challi and the Ukrainian émigré artist Alexis Gritchenko. And such studies, if they will appear, of course, could challenge another widely accepted belief that there was little mutual influence between local artists and Russophone émigré artists in the city. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much indeed for a fascinating presentation. I'm surely not the only one of our audience that had not heard of the vast majority of these artists. And so you have really opened up a window into our lives. And of course, it raises, as you rightly say, all sorts of interesting questions. I mean, one obvious one is yes, these people had largely moved to Turkey after the Russian Revolution, but were they all white Russians? And this is, I think, the key point with it, because some of the art I thought showed some modernist tendencies, and so could it be the case that some white Russians were modernist artists, and that modernist Russian art was not purely confined to the socialists? So, what do you think?
Well, as I have mentioned today, not all of them belonged to the white movement. And if you speak about ethnic background and ethnic origins, yes, definitely, they were not only Russians, but also Ukrainians and Jews. And I would say if you combine Jews and Karaite artists, so it's the second largest group among Russophone Émigré artists in Constantinople at the time.
Mhm.
But there were also those of Polish origin and Armenians and so on. So yeah, it was pretty motley, motley group. Yeah.
No, I understand. But what about the political orientation, though? Was it also mixed politically?
Yes, they would actually. Well, the problem here is that we not many ego documents of Russophone émigré artists have
Mhm.
been preserved, so we can only assume. For instance, there was an émigré photographer, Jules Kanzler.
Mhm.
Um, he worked for the Monarchist magazine, and he was responsible for all the photographs in this magazine. It was published in Constantinople at the beginning of the
Mhm.
1920s. So apparently, since he worked for the Monarchist magazine, he was himself most likely of these political views. But
Yeah.
still, we can only assume, and we don't have any proof of this. Apart from that, another émigré artist came to my mind, George Artemov, Georgy Artemov. And he, if I'm not mistaken, he at first he supported the Greens, and after he changed his mind, and this was actually a pretty common case at the time. Were there communists and those who supported Bolsheviks among them? Most likely, yes, but again, there are no proofs, so we can only assume. For instance, an émigré artist, Nikolai Sarafanov.
Mhm.
He was imprisoned sometime at the beginning of the 1940s already, and he was accused for being a spy for communists. Again, we don't know whether it was a false accusation or not, but still, this was the case. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's absolutely fascinating because, of course, the Archaeological Institute, the Russian Archaeological Institute in Istanbul, was an explicitly Tsarist imperialist project. So
Mhm.
anybody involved in that, well, I suppose anybody needs, even artists need to eat, as you said. So, you know, but nevertheless, anybody involved with that was certainly associated in some way with Russian imperialist expansion in the Balkans, because that was the aim of the institute in the first place. Um, I said, well, of course, I mean, they have to, as I said, they have to work. So but that was the aim of the institute anyway, the archaeological institute there. Their idea was to show that
Mhm.
the Byzantine archaeology of Istanbul would be suitable for an imperialist takeover that would include Istanbul or Constantinople in the Russian Empire, and so they were preparing the ground for that. Um, so yeah,
Yeah.
but on the other hand, these influences of the art, I guess, must have been quite diverse. I'm sorry we couldn't see more. But anyway, please just put your hand up or just jump straight in, colleagues, if you'd like to ask a question about these
I
fascinating
actually
things.
would be happy
Mm,
to comment
sure.
on your statement. Well, well, of course, Russian Archaeological Institute in Constantinople had this imperial background and imperial connotation and so on. And however, it is difficult, it's hard to say for sure whether Russophone émigré artists had this the same background and connotation. Most likely, it was unconsciously in their minds, most likely, yes, because many of them were students and they had various connection to the representatives of the Russian Archaeological Institute in Constantinople. For instance, Nikodim Kandakov, who taught while in St. Petersburg at various courses and at the St. Petersburg University and so on and so forth. However, I would say that this was not the only one reason why Russophone émigré artists, while in Constantinople, were interested in the Byzantine heritage and Byzantine landmarks. being artists, they were also interested in techniques and colors and forms and so on. And again, being artists, they were actually pretty much concerned about an awful state of various Byzantine landmarks and buildings in Constantinople at the time. And of course, I suppose that some of them actually wanted to be a sort of successors of this famous, well-known institute. Why not?
Yeah, oh, absolutely. Why not? No, I agree with you completely. It also strikes me, we have to also think of the emigres arriving in waves. So, for example, the famous Istanbul mango family, they came to Istanbul through from Baku because of the successive waves of the collapse of white resistance, and eventually they were just forced to leave. Yeah, so that kind of thing must have happened as well. But just put your hand up if anyone else would like to ask a question, because I don't want to monopolize. I don't know whether anybody else would like to say anything. Just unmute yourself if you would like to. Well, just whilst people are thinking about that, and I'm also fascinated by the overlap that you pointed out between theatre and art, because that really is such an important impulse. And I was also very interested in the diversity of the people that were coming from these different places from across Russia. But nevertheless, I mean, is there an influence of Stanislavski there? I mean, I would have thought there probably would have been, because he was so famous. Did you see, were any of them from Stanislavski's theatre? Do you know? Or
Well, no, actually, not that I'm aware of, and
right?
I wouldn't say that he had some influence here, but
Uh-huh.
from the perspective of the artists, many of them actually, I would say those who were successful ones were from Kharkiv. And in Kharkiv, it was a very common case when various artists became set designers, and they worked on decorations and
Okay.
costumes and so on and so forth, but
Okay.
in the so-called avant-garde style. So what is important here is that they brought this avant-garde style from the former Russian Empire to Constantinople. So, and it was for the first time. So absolutely, I'm absolutely sure that for many inhabitants and guests of Istanbul at the time, it was a huge surprise to see, costumes and decorations in cubism or
Yeah.
in futurism and so on. So yeah.
That was the point I was making about political plurality, you see. Because on the one hand, you've got these artists working with Byzantine realism, if you can call it that. On the other hand, with this futurist art, and that surely I was thinking implies some sort of social plurality as well. But
Yeah.
yeah.
And there were many different groups, and there were also portraitists who
Mm-hmm.
painted nearly all the representatives of the occupied Constantinople, and at a later time the representatives of the newly formed Turkish Republic. And also there were those who were fond of the Byzantine heritage, and again avant-garde artists and so on. Yeah, so there were absolutely totally different groups actually. And as for those who were fond of the Byzantine heritage, I also would like to add that some of them very quickly realized and understood that artworks featuring Byzantine landmarks and Byzantine heritage are actually in demand. And being immigrants and refugees, actually, they wanted to do both, to make a living and at the same time to do
Mm-hmm.
something they are interested in and out of personal interest. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. So some of them, for example, may have been producing iconographic work, for example, even.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I see. I see. Yeah, that's all really, really interesting. And what about music? Was there any discernible influence and overlap between art and music at this time, Russian music? Did you come across anything?
Well, I would say that this topic is still waits for for
Right,
its
right.
researchers, and yeah, because it is not well studied at all, to be honest. So this topic of immigrant artists has been largely overlooked, and I can say the same about musicians, despite the fact that actually there were much more musicians in the city in Constantinople at the time than artists, I mean painters. Yeah.
Huh,
So
right,
hopefully
right.
in the near future, maybe.
I see, I see. Well, there's a question here from Ilias. Do you want to ask your question live, Ilias, or should we just read it out for you? Um, Well, Ilias asks, was there any presence of emigre artists in the city before the mid 1910s and 1920s? So is there an earlier Russian influence, or does it only happen post-revolution?
Well, if you speak about influence or something like that, no, I wouldn't say
Hmm.
so. And of course, there were some individuals like, for instance, Ivazovsky and so on, who at some point of their lives lived and worked in Istanbul. But this is an
Hmm.
absolutely different case, and this is not the same, because here we speak about a huge group of artists who suddenly arrived in the city and started to work in the city, and the city started to influence them, and so on and so forth. So this is a different story, and some of them actually arrived in the city in 1919. And starting from 1919, they started to come in 1920 and 1921 and so on and so forth. Well, yeah.
Mm. Of course, that brings us on to the later, uh, the aftermath as well. Did your diagram show that many of them left in 1923?
1923.
When did I thought from one of the diagrams that you showed with your pictures
Mhm.
that many of them left just at that point, but maybe I didn't read it correctly. So was there a big departure at some point in the post-Ottoman early Republican period?
Well, if you speak about departure, the first and the largest group of Russian immigrant artists left in 1923. And
Hmm.
this happened primarily due to the formation of the Turkish Republic. So Atatürk
Hmm.
came to power, and Atatürk had pretty close relations with the Bolsheviks. Russophone immigrant artists didn't no longer felt themselves safe in Constantinople. So they left, and the second largest group left in 1927, and this happened primarily because it was unclear whether Turkish Republic would allow them to stay and work in the city. So there was this serious uncertainty among them. And those who left in the 1930s, they were actually, well, they had close relatives in other countries. For instance, Roman Belinsky, he left for the Balkans, and
Hmm.
Boris Egis, he left for Lithuania because his close relatives lived there. So this was, I would say, family cases. These were family cases primarily, not because of some event or serious situation or something like this. I would say that those who left, there were also those who left after 1955, after anti-minorities Istanbul pogroms. So yes, that was the case, and they were already Turkish citizens, but because of this attitude towards minorities, they decided to leave, and they left to the United States and Canada and so on and so forth.
Yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah, yeah. That's fascinating. Yeah, because of course, of course, from Istanbul, it would have looked like a Bolshevik revolution. Uh, uh, once more happening. We've got the empire, we've got the Sultan being deposed, we've got the nationalists rising in Ankara, and even Western observers were not clear for a long time whether or not Ataturk was going to expand his ties with the communists or not. That was a
Yeah,
really great worry. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. How awful it must have been to be a refugee 3 or 4 times over. Leaving Moscow
Yes.
and then maybe getting to Baku, leaving Baku, coming to Istanbul, then leaving Istanbul and having to go somewhere else. Really an adventurous, but not a very nice life.
Yes, and
Indeed.
I think the stories of Émigré artists who arrived in Istanbul not directly, but through the Central Asia, they are especially interesting, because it was like pretty far away, and they they arrived in the city through the Central Asia. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Mm. And there's Ilyas would like to follow up by asking whether there's any post 1940s Russian evidence. I'm just trying to think about that. Peter, when you were first of all in Turkey, did you come across any Russians in particular? Was it still evident in the 1960s?
Mhm. Well, I've been able to work on the 1920s and 1930s so far.
Mm-hmm.
The Russian Russophone immigrants, including artists, in the subsequent time, is not a well studied topic at all, or maybe I can say that there are no studies on the topic on this particular subject. So I'm planning to work on this, and fortunately, we have some memoirs and some eager documents related to this subject, especially to the 1940s. So hopefully, hopefully, I will be able to write some articles on this.
Mm. Yeah.
But for sure, what I want to say that Russophone immigrants, including artists, kept arriving and kept coming to Constantinople, to Istanbul, even after the 1930s. And these were primarily those who lived in the southern parts of the Soviet Union, that is to say, in Odessa, in Crimea, and so on and so forth, because
Mm-hmm.
it was much more easy to escape from there and to go to Turkey.
Yeah. Yeah. So one can imagine the ones from St. Petersburg would have gone the other way, gone
Yes,
via
definitely.
gone via the
Yeah,
north. Yeah. Yeah.
it
Yeah.
would be another story.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. Mm. Yeah. Well, thank you. It gives food for thought. Any more questions for our speaker? Oh well, people are a little bit quiet tonight. Whilst we have the opportunity. Any other thoughts? Well, well, if nobody has any questions, I think all we can do is thank you for your fascinating paper, and wish you all good fortune for your later researches.
Thank you for your time. Thank you for your time. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you very much, John. Have a nice evening.
Thank you. You too.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.